Hey, welcome back to our final edition, part 4 of Fat, Feast or Fear. My name is Dr. Mark Woodall, and I have a blog at naturopathichealthandfitness.com if you'd like to learn more about me and my thoughts and opinions. We're going to change gears, like I said at the end of the lecture in part 3, from talking about saturated fat to now talking about the omega-3 fatty acids. And we begin this discussion with a principle. And that principle is that you are what they eat. Meaning that for many years, we've always accepted the idea that you are what you eat. Meaning when you break down food in your stomach, your body turns it into muscle, it turns it into ligaments, it turns it into blood, it turns it into the very things that you are and what makes you who you are. But we cannot forget that what the animal was eating is important in that mixture as well. And a group of researchers published a paper about 4 years ago called Red Meat from Animals Offered a Grass-Fed Diet Increases Plasma and Platelet Omega-3 PUFA in Healthy Consumers. So what these group of Irish researchers wanted to find out was if we feed cows and lamb grain or grass, how does that affect their omega-3 fatty acid composition in their meat? And then does that actually have a clinically significant difference in your blood or my platelets or your cells? And in fact, it does have a difference. We see here that when we look at the fatty acid concentrations of the omega-3s, total omega-3 polyunsaturated fat in the grass-fed group, it's at 60 milligrams per quarter pound and only 36 milligrams per quarter pound in the concentration. So almost a double the amount of omega-3 fatty acids are in grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef. Let's look at how that affects human beings. Does having a higher omega-3 fed animal increase omega-3s in your plasma and platelets in a human? Their data shows that it does. And we notice here that we went from 3.93 to all the way to over 5 if you're eating grass-fed beef, where if we were eating corn-fed beef, we actually deplete the omega-3 fatty acids that are in our blood and plasma and platelets. And this is a diagram to show the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid pathways. We've talked just briefly now about the omega-3s, but I want to spend a moment quickly talking about omega-6 fatty acids, such as arachidonic acid. A lot of people in the blogosphere and the internet will say, omega-6 are so bad, we need to avoid them. And a lot of times they're talking about polyunsaturated vegetable oils, and I agree with them. But when we start talking about animal omega-6 fatty acids like arachidonic acid, I have a different opinion. Arachidonic acid is a highly important molecule that serves a host of functions in our body, and it's more of a yin-yang question of balance than a yes or no proposition of life. This is a diagram of what an artist's rendition of a cell membrane looks like. And you notice how there's green and red and yellow and violet motifs. And these are different cell receptors that are on your cells, and they're made of different fatty acids. So if we look at these red molecules, we'll call that the omega-6 arachidonic acid. It plays an important role in monitoring the internal and external environment. And that just because omega-6 can create inflammatory molecules does not mean that it has to. Taking that one step further, looking at the biochemical pathway of inflammation, we see that there's a lot of stuff going on. So let's wipe out most of that stuff and leave the essentials. What we see is that there are just 3 main fatty acids: the arachidonic fatty acids and the fish oil or omega-3 fatty acids. And that for them to be released and inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, meaning less inflammatory, you need something called PLA2 to activate or release them from the cell so that they can morph into different molecules. And this is called phospholipase A2. It's an enzyme that basically cuts a fatty acid from your cell, allowing it to then morph into a different chemical messenger that will have a physiologic effect on your body. And the reason we care about these effects on our body is because they can do a lot of bad things, like myocardial constriction, meaning reducing blood flow to our heart, making our blood more sticky or more prone to having strokes and clots. It can also increase vascular permeability, so we have more edema in our legs. But just like I said, it's more of a yin-yang balance. These molecules can also serve as vasodilatory molecules, allowing more blood flow to get to areas, having an anti-inflammatory effect on the body, and also regulating the immune system. So we've talked a little bit about saturated fatty acids over the past 3 lectures. I hope I haven't lost you too far along the way. And we've just discussed the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids. And I'd like to bring it back with this review paper from a biochemical professor from the Long Island University in Brooklyn, New York, talking about dietary fats and health. And what he says is that the polyunsaturated fats regulate the sterol receptor element binding proteins. These are proteins that basically control our cholesterol synthesis in our body. And that's important to realize because when we add polyunsaturated fatty acids to people's diets, their cholesterol is going to go down, just like I showed you in that very first paper in the Sydney Diet Heart Study. But that didn't change the outcomes of death and mortality like we thought it would. Okay, so just because we can modulate something in the body doesn't mean it actually leads to a longer and better quality life. He then goes on to say that single nucleotide polymorphisms in genes, what those are, SNPs are basically a change in the alphabet of one of your genes, and it can affect how the receptor that is coded from that gene functions. He says SNPs in genes for many of the above factors, as well as in genes for several apolipoproteins, TNFs, glutathione peroxidases, and other proteins, result in a wide range of individual responses to dietary constituents. What he's trying to say in a really fancy way is that because we are unique individuals genetically, that makes us unique individuals biochemically. And so that we always need to keep that in mind here. He then finally concludes with what I think is the take-home point from this talk. And he says, claims that tropical oils with a high saturated fatty acid content increase the risk of coronary artery disease lack clear scientific evidence to that effect. Indeed, countries with high intake of tropical oils have some of the lowest heart disease in the world. What I always like to bring to the forefront is to never forget the past, meaning that when we have data from traditional cultures that ate traditional foods and were untouched by many of the different confounding variables that affect modern society, we need to understand and look at, did that affect their health? If you have any more questions, I'd love to continue this conversation. Please shoot me an email or post on my blog. I appreciate your time and patience through this tour de force in the section of fat and their effects on human health and the evidence supporting it. Thank you very much.